They say history is written by the victors, but there are stories that were never written at all. Stories that drift through time like whispers carried on cold winds, buried under centuries of dust. Silenced not because they were forgotten, but because someone feared what might happen if they were remembered. In that silence, one name survives like a ghost that refuses to fade. The Knights Templar. To some, they were holy warriors of Christ, pious men marked by the Red Cross riding into battle with prayers on their lips. To others, they were conspirators, heretics, and sorcerers in white cloaks, their true loyalties hidden beneath vows of purity. For pilgrims, they were saviors on the dangerous roads to the Holy Land, protectors against raiders and thieves. But to kings and princes, they were something far more dangerous. Rivals with wealth greater than monarchs, armies stronger than nations, and a silence that concealed more than prayers. Behind their armor, behind fortress walls and coded ledgers, there lingered a presence that unsettled even the church. Something the Vatican itself could never fully erase. Something that breathed still in the cracks of history like embers smoldering beneath ash, waiting for a single breath of air to burn again. So I ask you, stay with me. Do not look away, because what you are about to hear is not just another story of medieval knights. It is a descent into shadows, into secrets so dangerous they reshaped kings, popes, and entire nations. If you remain until the end, you may never look at history the same way again. Imagine medieval Europe, a land scarred by famine and war, where superstition haunted every street and the church's grip bound thought as tightly as chains. And then imagine amid this darkness a small brotherhood of knights who seemed to answer only to God, moving freely in ways no king could restrain. They were 9 at the start, only 9. Poor, hungry, their armor dented, their horses thin, their cause nearly invisible. By all accounts, they should have disappeared into obscurity, a footnote in the endless wars of the Crusades. And yet, within a single century, their banner of the Red Cross flew not just over Jerusalem, but across Europe itself. Their fortresses rose like stone giants. Their coffers overflowed with gold. Their whispers reached the ears of popes. Their presence unsettled kings. How did 9 penniless knights climb to such impossible heights? What secret carried them from rags to power greater than crowns? Some say it was gold hidden beneath the Temple Mount. Others claim they uncovered holy relics, perhaps even the Ark of the Covenant itself. But there are darker whispers still that they unearthed knowledge, truths forbidden, secrets that could tear apart the very foundations of Christendom. Knowledge so dangerous that kings would conspire and the Vatican itself would light pyres just to bury it again. This is why every tale of the Templars carries an aftertaste of dread. Their fall did not come slowly like so many other orders before them. It came suddenly, surgically, as if carefully planned by hands unseen. On a single night across an entire kingdom, the hammer fell, and the white cloaks of the Templars were dragged into darkness. Friday the 13th, October 1307. A date that still lingers in superstition. Soldiers burst through doors. Knights were shackled in their beds, chained in dungeons. Torture followed fire, rack, and iron. Their screams echoed through Paris. And under unbearable agony, they confessed to horrors unthinkable. worshipping a skull named Baphomet, spitting upon the cross, embracing rituals too obscene to repeat. Most scholars say these were lies, forced by pain and fear. Yet if they were lies, why do traces of the same accusations appear in other places, other records far beyond the king's hand? Were they fabrications or glimpses of a truth too monstrous to face? In the end, Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master of the Templars, was bound to the stake on an island in the Seine. As flames consumed him, he cursed the Pope and the King, and within a year, both were dead. Some call it coincidence, others call it proof that the Templars wielded power that did not end with death. Witnesses claim that the fire which devoured him did not silence his voice, that his cries carried across the city long after his body had turned to ash. Chroniclers called it the cursed fire, a voice that refused to die. And then, silence. The treasures were gone. The ledgers vanished. The fleet of ships at La Rochelle slipped into the night and was never seen again. The church declared them erased, reduced to nothing more than memory. But silence is not death. Silence is strategy, and what lingers in silence is often more dangerous than what walks in the light. The story of the Knights Templar does not begin with glory. It begins with whispers in the dark, with questions history dares not answer, with shadows that still move beside us. And as we step deeper into their world, we must be prepared for one truth. What stares back at us from the silence may not be human. The year was 11 or 19. Jerusalem lay wounded, its streets still bleeding from the crusades, its stones echoing with the cries of the conquered. The city, holy to three faiths, was a scar carved into the earth, rebuilt again and again on foundations soaked in blood. Pilgrims walked its narrow roads with fear in their hearts, preyed upon by thieves and raiders who haunted the deserts and valleys. Into this chaos rode 9 men. They were not kings, not princes, not men of wealth or great name. They were knights in little more than tattered armor, poor in coin and status, led by a figure who would become legend, Hugh de Payens. With him rode companions bound by the same oath: poverty, chastity, obedience. Their vow was simple, their mission humble, to guard pilgrims on their way to the holy city. But from the very beginning, something about them was strange. While other warriors fought openly, clashing swords on the battlefield, these 9 knights vanished from sight. They did not patrol roads as promised, nor did they ride in shining lines of defense. Instead, they were granted quarters at the most sacred and mysterious of places, the Temple Mount, the plateau said to house the ruins of Solomon's Temple, the place where heaven and earth were once believed to have touched. There, away from eyes and records, they descended into the earth. They dug beneath the stones. They searched in silence. For nearly a decade, no one knew what they were doing. No chronicles speak of patrols, no stories tell of battles fought. Only the silence of 9 men moving like shadows beneath holy ground. What were they looking for? Legends whisper of hidden tunnels sealed for centuries, of chambers built to guard secrets long forgotten. Some say they searched for the Ark of the Covenant, that legendary chest of fire and law, a relic said to carry the voice of God and the power to smite nations. Others claim they unearthed forbidden scroll texts written long before the birth of Christ, words that contradicted the church's authority and threatened its very foundation. And there are darker whispers still that they found something not of God at all. Something that should have remained buried in stone and dust forever. Picture a torchlight flickering against ancient walls, smoke curling in narrow tunnels, the sound of stone grinding as hidden doors gave way, the stale breath of air trapped for centuries rushing into their faces, and then silence breaking with the hollow groan of a chamber opening, a secret revealed. What did they see in that moment? Was it the Ark itself glowing with divine fire, or manuscripts brittle with age, filled with truths the church would have killed to keep hidden? No record tells us. Perhaps that is the point. When the 9 finally emerged from beneath the Temple Mount, they were not the same men who had entered. Something about them had changed. Where once they were beggars, suddenly they commanded respect. Where once they scraped for survival, suddenly gold and gifts poured into their hands. Within a generation, their name was spoken in courts and cathedrals. Within decades, they owned lands and fortresses that rivaled kingdoms. Coincidence? Or the reward for something discovered in the depths? Their official seal showed 2 knights riding a single horse. On the surface, it was a symbol of poverty, of humble beginnings. But to those who look deeper, it seems like a hidden message. 2 men, 1 body, 1 mission, outwardly pious, inwardly concealed. Poverty as disguise, humility as mask. The early years of the Templars were wrapped in silence. Silence in their intentions, silence in their discoveries, silence in their meteoric rise. And history teaches us, silence is never the absence of truth, it is its concealment. So why were 9 obscure knights allowed access to the holiest site in Christendom? Why were they given freedom to dig for years without question? And why, when they emerged, did the Pope himself suddenly grant them privileges no other order had ever known? The answers do not survive, only the silence remains. But silence itself tells a story. Something was found beneath those stones, something extraordinary enough to alter the fate of 9 men and through them the fate of all of Europe. Something that turned poverty into wealth, obscurity into power, and loyalty into something far more dangerous. The Templars were born in darkness, but perhaps in that darkness something else was born with them. Something older than kings, older than the church, older than Christendom itself. Something that still refuses to die. When the 9 knights finally emerged from the darkness of Jerusalem's Temple Mount, the world they returned to was no longer the same, nor were they. Within only a few short years, their names spread across Europe. Within decades, their order became one of the most powerful forces the medieval world had ever seen. And yet, their ascent seemed less like a natural rise than a sudden leap, as if some unseen hand had pulled them upward. In 1129, at the Council of Troyes, the Pope granted the Knights Templar official recognition. But this was no ordinary recognition. They were not bound by any king, not taxed by any crown, not answerable to any bishop. They would serve only the Pope himself. This papal decree transformed them into something unique, something terrifying. A sovereign order above the laws of nations, a brotherhood immune to earthly rulers, a force blessed by heaven but beyond the reach of earth. And so the Templars began to weave their empire not through conquest of lands alone, but through the mastery of shadows. Across Europe and the Holy Land, fortresses rose stone giants that towered like teeth against the sky. In Acre, in Tomar, in La Rochelle, their castles stood with a precision that astonished chroniclers. Their walls were too perfect, their lines too exact, as if guided by knowledge older than medieval masons. Spiral staircases descended into hidden vaults. Chambers without windows held secrets no chronicler could record, and strange markings were carved into the very stones themselves. Crosses twisted into unfamiliar shapes, 8-pointed stars aligned with celestial patterns, suns and moons etched with mathematical precision. Were these mere decorations? Or were they messages, codes left for those initiated into mysteries that the outside world could never touch? Travelers who passed these fortresses often whispered of unease. They said the castles felt less like homes of men and more like machines of stone, built to contain something or to guard something buried deep within. Some even claimed that the designs echoed ancient architecture, the pyramids of Egypt, the geometry of Greece, knowledge long thought lost, resurrected in silence by an order that had spent years beneath the Temple Mount. But their most powerful weapon was not built of stone. It was invisible, it was the coin. For the Templars, wealth was not merely a tool. It was a weapon sharper than steel. They invented a system of finance far ahead of their age. A pilgrim could leave his gold in Paris and, with only a coded note, withdraw it safely in Acre. Thieves could not touch it, kings could not seize it, and only the Templars could read the codes scrawled in cryptic symbols across sheepskin parchment. Their ledgers brimmed with geometric patterns and ciphers that remain unsolved to this very day. This invention was salvation to the common traveler. But to kings it was something far more dangerous. The rise of a power that controlled wealth across Christendom. The Templars became the bankers of Europe. They lent to nobles, financed crusades, and in some cases held the treasuries of entire kingdoms. To cross them meant to risk not only military reprisal but financial ruin. Whispers began to spread, whispers that the Templars could topple kingdoms without drawing a sword, simply by closing their vaults. That they could make a king a beggar, or a beggar a lord with the flick of a quill. And behind these whispers lurked something more chilling still. The suspicion that their power was not entirely of this world. Some chroniclers wrote of rituals carried out in secret, of nights when cloaked knights gathered in underground chambers, chanting words not found in any Christian prayer. Pilgrims spoke of seeing idols, strange heads, skulls kissed in ceremonies by men who swore to Christ by day but bowed to something else by night. Was this slander, invented by fearful rivals or fragments of truth, slipping through cracks the order could not seal? The Templars themselves never spoke. Their vow of silence was iron. Secrets passed from night to night through coded words and gestures understood instantly across thousands of miles. It was said that a Templar could ride into a foreign land, whisper a phrase, and another knight unknown to him but bound by the same oath would offer food, shelter, or gold. It was as if they were bound not by blood, but by something deeper. Something invisible that pulsed through them like a second heart. Within less than a century, the 9 poor knights had become lords without crowns, kings without thrones. Their empire had no borders, yet stretched across continents. Their allegiance was to no man, yet they answered to the Pope. Their wealth rivaled monarchs. Their fortresses intimidated armies, and their silence unnerved all who gazed upon them. This was no ordinary brotherhood. This was a shadow empire, an invisible skeleton beneath Christendom holding it together while pulling unseen strings. But shadows once large enough always invite fear. And fear, sharpened by envy, always becomes a blade. For the kings of Europe, the question was no longer, who are the Templars? The question became, how do we destroy them? For more than a century, the Templars thrived in the strange space between heaven and earth. They were warriors, but not bound by kings. They were monks, but richer than princes. They were the Pope's chosen soldiers, yet their loyalty to Rome made them enemies to crowns across Europe. At first, kings tolerated them, even admired them. These knights fought in crusades, guarded pilgrims, and built fortresses that seemed unbreachable. They prayed in white cloaks marked by the Red Cross, a symbol of purity and sacrifice. But behind that mask of holiness lay something kings could not endure: independence. Because while armies could be commanded and nobles could be bribed, the Templars answered only to the Pope. They were free from taxes, immune to royal courts, and blessed with privileges no other order possessed. They could travel across borders untouched, build fortresses on foreign soil without asking permission, and hold treasures in their vaults that even monarchs could not open. They were supposed to be servants of Christendom, but in truth, they had become untouchable, and nothing breeds hatred in a king's heart more quickly than power he cannot control. By the late 13th century, monarchs across Europe were drowning in debt to the Templars. Crusades had drained coffers, wars had bled treasuries dry, and kings turned again and again to the white-cloaked bankers. Every coin borrowed, every contract signed, every loan taken chained rulers further to the order. No king felt this humiliation more than Philip IV of France. Philip the Fair. His wars had emptied his treasury, his debts to the Templars mounted like stones upon his chest, and the knights stood before him like creditors he could never escape. Imagine the fury of the most Christian king of France, forced to kneel before monks in white, begging for coin. For a man obsessed with power, it was intolerable. Philip's admiration turned to paranoia, paranoia into envy, envy into hatred. He saw their castles looming over his lands, their coffers swelling with his borrowed gold, their silence covering secrets he could not touch. He whispered to his advisors, "What do they hide? What do they worship in the dark? Why do their symbols twist away from the cross and crown?" And then the fear took root, fear sharpened into a blade. On the morning of Friday, October 13th, 1307, the blade fell, a date that still stains superstition. Across France, in the same hour, Templar commanderies were stormed. Doors were shattered, knights dragged from their beds, chained and thrown into dungeons. It was not chaos, it was precise. Too precise, as if every lock, every chamber, every hiding place had already been mapped. To strike so suddenly, so efficiently, suggested betrayal from within or the hand of someone who had waited for years in silence. What followed was horror. The dungeons of Paris filled with screams. Men who had faced swords on battlefields now faced iron in the dark. They were stretched on racks, crushed by weights, burned with red-hot brands. Under pain beyond imagination, the confessions came. Words dragged from broken throats, heresy, blasphemy, idol worship. They confessed to spitting on the cross, to obscene rituals, to kissing a skull called Baphomet. They confessed to things so grotesque the church would not dare record them in detail. Historians today call these confessions lies, inventions forced by pain. But the horror lies in the repetition. The same accusations surfaced again and again in different dungeons from different mouths in different cities. Could every word be fabrication, or were fragments of something darker bleeding through, truths too monstrous for history to acknowledge? The Pope himself hesitated. Clement V owed his throne to Philip, yet the Templars were his own holy warriors. Could he allow their destruction? At first he resisted, but Philip pressed harder, threatening, whispering of heresy. In the end, the Pope chose survival over loyalty. He turned his pen into a weapon, signing the death warrant of the knights who had once fought in Christ's name. And so the Pope's soldiers became the Pope's enemies. On March 18, 1314, Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master, was led to the pyre in Paris. Flames rose around him, but his voice did not falter. Before the watching crowd, he cursed both king and pope, summoning them to face God's judgment within a year. And within that year, both were dead. Coincidence, some say, but others whisper that the curse was real, that de Molay's voice did not end in fire, that the Templars carried power into death itself. Eyewitnesses swore the fire burned unnaturally bright, as though it fed on something other than wood. They claimed de Molay's face remained untouched by the flames until the final moment, as if defiance itself kept him alive. The chroniclers called it the curse of the Templars, a curse that haunted Europe for generations. The Pope's soldiers had fallen, their order dissolved, their leaders burned, their name declared cursed and erased. But fire does not kill shadows, fire only stretches them. The flames that consumed Jacques de Molay in Paris were meant to erase the Templars forever. Their leaders burned, their order dissolved, their name condemned. But when the smoke cleared and the ashes cooled, something far more unsettling emerged. The treasures were gone on the night before Philip's soldiers stormed the commanderies. Heavy wagons creaked out of Paris, cloaked in darkness, guarded by knights who would never be seen again. They rolled through the city streets toward the Seine, and by dawn they had vanished along with everything the king had hoped to seize. In La Rochelle, the Templars' fleet dozens of ships flying the Red Cross slipped silently into the Atlantic. When soldiers arrived the next morning, the harbor stood empty. The ships were never seen again. What did they carry? Was it gold mountains of it, enough to pay the debts of kings and fuel wars for centuries? Was it relics, chalices, bones of saints, or even the Ark of the Covenant itself? Or was it something far darker? Ancient manuscripts, secrets pulled from beneath the Temple Mount, knowledge so dangerous that both Pope and King conspired to bury it forever. Legends multiplied. Some said the wagons carried crates filled not with gold, but with bones, relics too holy or too blasphemous to ever be displayed. Others whispered of scrolls that rewrote the story of Christ, secrets that would shatter the Church's authority. Still others swore that the treasure was not of this world at all, but proof of a power older than Christianity, a power that could not be allowed to resurface. The ships of La Rochelle became phantoms. Some claimed they sailed north to Scotland, a land already excommunicated, hostile to the Pope, where fugitive knights could find sanctuary. Others whispered that they sailed west into waters uncharted toward lands beyond the horizon. Centuries later, when Columbus crossed the Atlantic, his maps bore markings eerily similar to Templar symbols. Could it be that the fleet had reached the New World long before, that the corn and aloe carved into the walls of Rosslyn Chapel in Scotland, plants unknown in Europe until after Columbus, were silent testimony that the Templars had sailed where no European should yet have gone? If true, then the treasure of the Templars may not lie in any vault of Europe, but buried beneath American soil, hidden in forests and rivers that kings and popes never touched. But perhaps the most terrifying possibility is this: the treasure was not wealth at all. It was knowledge. Knowledge of the seas, maps of the stars, codes of navigation, and ancient sciences preserved from the East. Knowledge so powerful it could build nations, collapse kingdoms, and guide explorers centuries ahead of their time. If that was the treasure, then it did not vanish with the ships. It scattered, it spread, it flowed into hands unseen, into Portugal's navigators, into secret societies, into the veins of history itself. And still the whispers persist. Fishermen claimed for generations to see ghostly sails on stormy nights, red crosses glowing faintly on the horizon, moving without wind, vanishing into the mist. Some called them omens of death, others guardians of a secret too dangerous to reveal. What became of the wagons that rolled out of Paris? What became of the ships that slipped into the sea, no one knows. And perhaps no one ever will. But silence is itself an answer. For when treasure vanishes so completely, so perfectly, it is not by accident, it is by design. The king thought he had destroyed the order. Yet the greatest horror is this: their gold, their relics, their knowledge, everything that made the Templars a force greater than kingdoms, was carried away into the shadows. Not lost, not destroyed, hidden, waiting. And in that silence, the Templars grew more powerful than ever. The pyres of Paris burned. The last Grand Master cursed his enemies as the flames devoured him. The Pope declared the order dissolved. The king proclaimed them erased. And yet the silence that followed was not the silence of death. It was the silence of survival. Because shadows do not die in fire. They stretch, they shift, they hide. In Portugal, the Templars did not vanish at all. King Denis II, clever and defiant, refused to carry out the Pope's decree. Instead, he performed a sleight of hand that fooled both Rome and France. He dissolved the Templars in name, but in their place he created a new order. The Order of Christ. The knights changed their cloaks, their castles changed their banners, but the men, the wealth, the ships, the knowledge, everything that made the Templars what they were, remained intact. And Rome, desperate to maintain stability in Iberia, allowed it. The Templars lived on, protected by a new name, free to plot their next moves in silence. It was under this very order that Portugal's age of exploration would ignite. Henry the Navigator himself, the architect of voyages that opened the seas, was Grand Master of the Order of Christ. The ships that discovered new worlds bore sails marked with crosses descended from the Templar red. Was this coincidence? Or was it the continuation of a plan that began centuries earlier beneath the stones of Jerusalem? Far to the north, Scotland became another haven. At that time, Scotland was excommunicated, its king in open defiance of Rome. When the Templars fled Philip's purge, Scotland's shores offered sanctuary. There, whispers claim they carried their secrets into stone. The most haunting evidence lies in Rosslyn Chapel, built in the mid-15th century. Its walls are covered with symbols, crosses twisted into unfamiliar shapes, stars, swords, roses, and carvings that should not exist. Corn and aloe plants unknown in Europe until after Columbus are carved into its pillars centuries too early. Did the Templars bring this knowledge from across the Atlantic? Did their vanished fleet reach shores no European should have seen? The chapel offers no answers. It only stares back in silence, daring us to question what we know of history. And survival was not only on seas or in cloisters. It was in rituals, in codes, in societies that rose centuries later. Freemasonry, with its oaths of secrecy, its symbols of geometry and light, its silent brotherhood bound by mystery, bears uncanny resemblance to the Templars' ways. Too uncanny to dismiss as chance. Did the Templars transform into Masons? Did their spirit bleed into lodges, into revolutions, into the very nations we live in today? Perhaps the most chilling thought is that survival was not accidental, it was deliberate. The Templars may have shed their name, but they carried their silence into every shadow they entered. They buried themselves not in graves, but in institutions, in myths, in societies hidden in plain sight. The Pope believed he had erased them. The King believed he had destroyed them. But the truth is far more terrifying. The Templars survived, stripped of their red cross, but stronger in shadow than ever they were in the light. And shadows, unlike kingdoms, do not fall. They wait. When the Pope dissolved the Templars, when kings dragged them in chains and burned them alive, they believed they had destroyed the order. But what kings and popes feared most was not the swords of the knights, nor their fortresses, nor their ships. What they feared was the treasure that could not be weighed on scales or locked in vaults. Unlike gold, knowledge cannot be stolen by force. Unlike armies, knowledge cannot be burned to ash. And what the Templars carried was knowledge gathered from east and west, from ancient ruins and forbidden texts, from the stones of the Temple Mount itself. Knowledge that seeped into Europe like blood through cloth unseen, but impossible to wash away. Within their commanderies, the Templars built something no other order had: schools. Their knights were not trained only to wield swords, but to master mathematics, astronomy, law, navigation, cryptography, languages. They learned to write ciphers, to draw maps of the stars, to copy manuscripts brought back from the East. Many who entered their halls discovered not barracks, but academies. Not soldiers, but scholars in armor. Some whispered that their archives contained manuscripts thought lost forever, Greek philosophies burned in Athens, scrolls of medicine from Alexandria, fragments of early Christian texts that the church itself had tried to erase. And when soldiers ransacked their libraries during the purge, they found almost nothing. Shelves stood bare, volumes missing, parchments vanished. Where had they gone? Were they smuggled out before the arrests, hidden in monasteries, or carried away by the silent ships of La Rochelle? Fragments of their knowledge surfaced centuries later. Ancient Greek medical texts reappeared in European libraries. Maps that showed lands no European had officially reached. Even the Codex Gigas, the Devil's Bible, enormous and filled with secrets, bears passages written in ciphers strikingly similar to those of the Templars. Scholars suggest parts of it were copied by hands trained in their cryptography. If so, their pen lived long after their sword was broken.
But their legacy was not only in manuscripts. It was etched into the very structure of Europe. The Templars pioneered systems of law and finance that survive to this day. They recorded property rights, enforced contracts, and created legal instruments resembling modern trusts. They became custodians of wealth across kingdoms, inventing systems of credit and loans that laid the foundations for central banking. Every time a contract is signed, every time wealth is transferred without a coin exchanged, their ghost lingers. Even in stone, their fingerprints remain. Cathedrals and town halls built after their supposed annihilation are marked with their symbols. 8-pointed stars, stylized crosses, sun and moon diagrams aligned with solstices. These were not decorations. They were codes, silent messages carved into stone, whispers saying, "We are still here." The Templars' knowledge could not be killed because it was not bound to a name. It seeped into architecture, into law, into banking, into secret societies. It became the marrow of Europe itself. And here lies the horror, because knowledge is more dangerous than gold. Gold can be hoarded, armies can be defeated, but knowledge survives in fragments, in symbols, in whispers passed from master to initiate. The more it is attacked, the deeper it burrows. The kings believed they had burned the Templars. The Pope declared them erased. But knowledge does not burn. Knowledge does not vanish. Knowledge hides, waits, and shapes the world in silence. And so, though the knights turned to ash, their true treasure smoldered on. A treasure that refused to die. Centuries passed. The flames that had devoured Jacques de Molay faded into legend, and the church declared the Templars nothing more than ashes scattered on the wind. But the silence they left behind did not fade. It moved, changed shape. It whispered beneath the foundations of nations. For silence, when cultivated long enough, becomes a seed. And seeds, once buried deep, always find a way to grow. By the 17th and 18th centuries, Europe was trembling on the edge of transformation. Monarchies weakened, kings lost their grip on power, and new ideas of liberty and equality began to stir. But behind the revolutions, behind the mobs in the streets and the declarations of rights, something else was moving, something older, something cloaked in ritual and geometry. The symbols of the Templars began to reappear. The 8-pointed star, the cross within a circle, the obsession with east-west alignments, geometry, and light. They surfaced not on battlefields, but in lodges, not among knights in armor, but in secret societies bound by oaths of silence. Freemasonry rose in this period, claiming descent from ancient builders. Yet its rituals, its codes, its symbols bore uncanny resemblance to those of the Templars. Secret handshakes, oaths of loyalty sealed in silence. The compass and the square, echoes of geometry once carved into fortress walls. The reverence for light, the worship of knowledge hidden from the uninitiated. Too many parallels to dismiss as coincidence. Were the Freemasons truly heirs of stonemasons, or were they the continuation of the Templars, reborn under a new name, their silence disguised as fraternity, their knowledge woven into the fabric of revolutions? The evidence lingers in history's darkest moments. During the French Revolution, the monarchy of France, the very throne that had condemned the Templars to fire, collapsed in blood. Peasants stormed the Bastille, nobles fled, the king was led to the guillotine. And in the chaos, the symbols of the Templars resurfaced. Banners marked with stars and circles, public buildings aligned like chapels of old, their designs echoing the geometry of the order. The city itself seemed to pulse with a hidden code, as if the revolution was not only political, but ritualistic, a final revenge carried out centuries after Jacques de Molay's curse. Across the ocean, in the United States, the founding fathers George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, and many others were Freemasons. The new nation's symbols bore the mark of secret knowledge: the all-seeing eye, the unfinished pyramid, the motto hidden in Latin on the dollar bill. These were not the symbols of ordinary democracy. They were whispers of something older, a geometry that traced its lineage back to the shadows of Jerusalem. The Red Cross of the Templars no longer flew on banners, but their seed had taken root in new forms: lodges, revolutions, republics. They no longer marched in armor, but they moved behind thrones, behind governments, behind nations. Always silent, always unseen. And here lies the true horror. What if the revolutions we celebrate as the will of the people were not spontaneous at all, but carefully cultivated storms, planted centuries earlier by an order that had never died? What if liberty, equality, and fraternity were not only ideals of Enlightenment thinkers, but the continuation of a code whispered by knights who once swore vows beneath the stones of Solomon's temple? If so, then the revolutions of Europe and the birth of America were not new beginnings. They were the flowering of seeds planted in silence long before seeds that the fire of 1314 could not destroy. And if that is true, then perhaps we are not living in a world free of the Templars. Perhaps we are living in their world. The world was told the Templars were gone, burned, dissolved, erased by papal decree. The Pope declared it so, the King proclaimed it so, and history dutifully recorded it as truth. But in the shadows of the Vatican itself, fragments suggest a different story. A story not of extinction, but of negotiation. Because what if the Church, for all its proclamations, never truly wanted the Templars to vanish? What if, instead of annihilation, there was a bargain? Whispers in Vatican archives speak of hermits granted access to secret rooms in the centuries after the dissolution. They wore white tunics cinched with black belts. They lived with austere discipline. They wrote in ciphers. They were not called Templars, but their description is unmistakable. Why would the Vatican allow such men to exist? Why let them roam the corridors of power in silence? When their order had been condemned as heresy, the answer lies in what the Templars had created. They were more than warriors. They had built systems of finance, networks of law, strategies of defense and diplomacy that Europe had come to depend on. To destroy them entirely would have been to rip the skeleton out of Christendom itself. Worse still, there was always the possibility that the Templars had discovered something beneath the Temple Mount scrolls. Relics, truths too dangerous to surface. If the Church pressed too hard, those secrets could spill into the light. Better to make peace with shadows than risk the fire of revelation. And so, a silent pact was struck. Never written, never spoken, but real. The Vatican declared the Templars destroyed. The Templars, in turn, shed their name, disappeared from the open stage, and continued their work in silence. Look closely, and the fingerprints of this agreement are everywhere. In Portugal, the Pope himself sanctioned the transformation of the Templars into the Order of Christ, not a rebellion, not a survival in secret, but an official disguise blessed by Rome. In Scotland, far beyond papal control, their refuge was tolerated, never challenged. In monasteries across southern France and Germany, cryptic manuscripts echoing Templar ciphers survived untouched. This was not negligence. This was tolerance. Deliberate, calculated, silent, because the Vatican knew. It knew the Templars were not truly gone. And perhaps in some way it needed them. Needed their systems, their networks, their silence. Perhaps even respected their discipline, their ability to keep secrets even under fire. So both sides played their roles. The Church proclaimed victory. The Knights accepted disappearance. But beneath the surface, the truth pulsed. The Templars still lived, and the greatest power of Christendom had chosen to let them. And here lies the most chilling thought of all. What if the silence we mistake for absence is not absence at all? What if it is complicity? The Church did not destroy the Templars. The Church conspired with them. And in that conspiracy, both found survival. 7 centuries have passed since the night the Templars were dragged from their beds, shackled, tortured, and burned. Their castles lie in ruins, their red crosses faded to dust, their order declared dead by kings and popes alike. And yet their shadow has never left us, because the question that haunts history is not how they lived, nor even how they died. It is what they discovered. Beneath the stones of the Temple Mount, did they find the Ark of the Covenant, a relic capable of leveling cities and toppling kings? Did they unearth scrolls that rewrote the story of Christ? Truths so dangerous the Vatican siege. Os fire over exposure, or did they stumble upon knowledge, mathematics, sciences, maps of the stars that seemed like sorcery to the medieval world? Whatever it was, it transformed 9 poor knights into the most powerful brotherhood of their age. And when kings struck to erase them, that same secret vanished into the night, carried on wagons out of Paris, on ships that slipped silently into the Atlantic, on whispers that seeped into lodges, revolutions, and nations. Gold can be counted, relics can be weighed, but knowledge is invisible. It flows through time, through wars, through institutions. It survives in fragments, in laws, in architecture, in symbols that most pass by without noticing. Look closely, and the fingerprints of the Templars are everywhere. In the crosses and stars carved into Rosslyn Chapel, whispering of lands discovered too early. In the symbols of Freemasonry, echoing the vows and rituals of the order. In the banks and contracts that mirror Templar inventions. In the architecture of Paris itself, aligned with sun and shadow, as though designed not for kings, but for a code. 700 years after their destruction, their presence still breathes through our world, not as knights in armor, but as invisible architects of the systems we live in. And so we are left with the eternal question: did the Templars perish in fire, or did they retreat into silence, transforming themselves, surviving in shadows, guiding history from behind a veil? Perhaps every revolution, every nation born, every secret society that thrives in darkness is not coincidence, but continuation. Perhaps we are not free of the Templars at all. Perhaps we are living in the world they designed. And if that is true, then Jacques de Molay's final curse was not vengeance. It was prophecy. Silence is not absence. Silence is protection. Silence is survival. The Knights Templar are gone, and yet they are not gone. Their name is legend. Their castles are ruins. Their crosses are relics. But their silence is alive. Alive in symbols. Alive in laws. Alive in whispers. And what whispers most chillingly is this: what if they are still here, watching, waiting, guiding, not in the open, but in the shadows where they have always thrived? And if they are, then the greatest horror is not that the Templars were destroyed. The greatest horror is that they never were.